We're going to examine a little-known but very important portion of our nation's Constitution. It's the treaty-making power contained in Article 6. And we're going to show how enemies of freedom intend to use treaties and United Nations covenants to circumvent and destroy the entire U.S. Constitution. But before we get to the Constitution's Article 6, let's briefly review what the founders gave us when they started this unique nation. The basic philosophy of our government appears in the Declaration of Independence. Here we find the premise upon which the nation was built, specifically the thunderous assertion contained in the Declaration stating that men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Rights do indeed come from God. And if they come from God, no government can properly take them away. No other nation in history was launched with such a sound foundation. What's terribly indicative about where we are being taken in America today is that most Americans have little or no appreciation of this fact, and because of Supreme Court decisions, this fundamental truth, our founding fathers called it a self-evident truth, cannot be taught in the government schools. We ought to rise up as one in righteous indignation about this. But the Declaration didn't just state the source of rights, it defined the proper role of government when it stated to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So there you have the foundation of our nation. There is a God, it is He who gave us our rights, and we formed a government to protect our God-given rights. God was on top, individuals with their rights next, and governments down on the bottom, where they surely belong. Today, God has been thrown out, government increasingly sits on top of the people, and more, the people are its slave. When our nation began, we fought a war to back up the Declaration of Independence, and then our founding fathers put together a constitution to create a federal government for only a very few specific purposes. Here's the Constitution in this little booklet, as well as the Declaration. The Constitution wasn't written to limit you and me. It was written to create a federal government with only a few powers and to limit it strictly to those powers specifically named. Right at the beginning, they added a Bill of Rights to list what they believed to be some of the rights God had given men. The Bill of Rights didn't grant any rights. It simply and clearly stated that the federal government had no business taking them away. Note how the First Amendment reads. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The wording is eminently clear. Congress shall make no law. The federal government was not to have power over such rights because the rights transcend any power and authority of government down here. Keep this in mind as we later show the remarkably different way the United Nations considers rights. The Constitution gives the President the power to make treaties with the concurrence of 2/3 of the Senate present at the time the treaty is discussed. But the Constitution also states that neither the House nor the Senate may conduct business without a quorum in attendance, and a quorum is defined in the Constitution as a majority. In the Senate, therefore, a quorum would be 51 of the 100 members. This clear statement in the Constitution has never been repealed, but is regularly ignored. Regarding the treaty-making power, the Constitution says in Article 6, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. It says that treaties made under the authority of the United States shall be the law of the land. But does the President, with the concurrence of the Senate, have the authority to use a treaty to supersede the Constitution? The founders emphatically say no. Let's turn to them for their opinions regarding treaty law. Alexander Hamilton stated, the only constitutional exception to the power of making treaties is that it shall not change the Constitution. On natural principles, a treaty which should manifestly betray or sacrifice primary interests of the state would be null. That's pretty clear. treaty-making power is limited. James Madison is the father of the Constitution, and he stated, "I do not conceive that power is given to the President and the Senate to dismember the empire or alienate any great essential right. I do not think the whole legislative authority to have this power." Again, that's very clear. The treaty-making power is limited. And Thomas Jefferson, reflecting on the attitude of our nation's leaders at the time, stated, "I say the same as to the opinion of those who consider the grant of treaty-making power to be boundless. If it is, then we have no Constitution." So, according to the lawgivers, treaty-making power is limited, and any law, including the Constitution, should be interpreted according to the attitude of the lawgiver. Laws that are no longer liked or needed can be changed. Portions of the Constitution that are no longer needed can be amended. This is another principle being lost today. But what of the second part of Article 6's discussion of the treaty-making power? Let's read this part again. "Treaties shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." Where earlier in Article 6, the framers referred to this Constitution, meaning the Constitution of the United States, they later referred to the Constitution, meaning the Constitution of any state. This passage does not place treaty power above the U.S. Constitution. It places treaty power above state constitutions. The founders frequently referred to the document they were writing as this Constitution. The use of "the" in the second part of this passage clearly refers to a state constitution and in no way authorizes treaties to supersede the entire U.S. Constitution. To sum up then, treaty law cannot supersede the Constitution. The treaty-making power is limited, and the President and the Senate cannot properly use treaties to undo the American system. But there is a wrongful use of treaty power. Some individuals would like to use treaty-making power to cancel the Declaration of Independence and the entire Constitution and bring our nation into world government. And the belief that treaty law supersedes the Constitution is widely held by powerful individuals seeking such a world government. One such man holding a false view of the Constitution's treaty power was John Foster Dulles. In 1921, Mr. Dulles helped to found the Council on Foreign Relations, the private New York City-based organization that has been promoting world government for more than 70 years. A statement in a 1952 speech made by Dulles in Louisville, Kentucky, shortly before he was named Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration, has been widely cited as a proper interpretation of treaty power. Here is what John Foster Dulles stated. "Treaties make international law, and also they make domestic law. Under our Constitution, treaties become the supreme law of the land. They are indeed more supreme than ordinary laws, for congressional laws are invalid if they do not conform to the Constitution, whereas treaty laws can override the Constitution. Treaties, for example, can take powers away from Congress and give them to the federal government or to some international body, and they can cut across the rights given the people by the Constitutional Bill of Rights." That's what Dulles had to say. Right away, we can see that something is very wrong, because Dulles states that rights are given the people by the Bill of Rights. That's totally false. The Declaration of Independence is correct. Men are endowed by their Creator with rights, not by the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights merely states that Congress shall make no law to take them away. But Dulles' insistence that treaty law supersedes the Constitution is the complete opposite of what Madison, Hamilton, Jefferson, and a host of others held. Sad to say, the Dulles attitude is shared by many today. And these are the individuals who would love to see our nation totally subservient to a world government under the United Nations. They want a new world order, which includes world government, and they are willing to scrap the American system to bring it about. In 1974, a man named Richard N. Gardner, a former State Department official and then is now a professor at Columbia University in New York City, wrote an article for the Council on Foreign Relations publication called Foreign Affairs. Entitled The Hard Road to World Order, Gardner called for the building of the House of World Order through, quote, an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, end quote. He even stated that treaties could be used for this piece-to-piece surrender of sovereignty. Entangling our nation in a host of UN treaties, covenants, and pacts amounts to eroding national sovereignty piece by piece, exactly what Gardner and others have been calling for many years. On April 2nd of 1992, the United States Senate ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of the United Nations, a document written in 1966 and steadfastly rejected by the Senate for 26 years. But that was before President Bush began promoting the New World Order. Before we look at the covenant itself, which is one of the pieces in the piece-by-piece surrender of sovereignty, as Richard N. Gardner put it, it is important to realize that the ratification of this document was accomplished by as few as 5 senators. The congressional record for April 2nd names only 5 members of the United States Senate who participated in the discussion and the ratification process for this measure. Attempts to find out if others were there have proven fruitless. No senator can recall who was there. The 5 who were there were Mitchell of Maine, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Pell of Rhode Island, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Moynihan of New York, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, Gore of Tennessee, who happens now to be the Vice President of the United States, and Stevens from Alaska. The congressional record tells us that these 5 senators discussed the matter and voted their approval by rising and being counted. There was no recorded vote. The presiding officer, Senator Stevens, declared that 2/3 of those present had signified their approval, and he declared the covenant ratified. But this covenant is a complete reversal of the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution. It hasn't become the supreme law yet, but its promoters expect that it soon will be. As we mentioned previously, the Constitution states that a majority of each house shall constitute a quorum to do business. A majority in the Senate is 51 members, but both houses of Congress have operated for a long time under self-written rules holding in essence that as long as no member of the body demands a presence of a quorum, only a few can conduct business. This booklet, Congressional Practice and Procedure, explains what they have done. Those who defend this practice argue that the numerous demands on the time of the members of Congress make it impossible for a quorum to be present whenever either house is in session. Of course, we have too much government, even for them. If our senators and representatives stayed within the strict limits of the Constitution, their work would be reduced by 80%, and so would the size and cost of government. So, although we can't be certain about the number of senators who participated, it is highly likely that only 5 of the 100 accomplished ratification of this UN covenant in the name of 250 million Americans. What about the covenant itself? Can anyone really be opposed to a document about civil and political rights? Well, let's take a look. Recall that our nation has a Bill of Rights that states that rights are not given by government, but they are from God. And the Bill of Rights simply states that Congress shall not take them away. The writers and ratifiers of the Bill of Rights agreed completely that rights come from God and that government's role is merely to protect them. Now, let's take a look at the way the United Nations discusses rights. Here is Article 18 of the UN Covenant. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. That sounds nice, doesn't it? But where did these rights come from? The UN doesn't recognize God and never has. So rights don't come from God, according to the United Nations. Actually, the United Nations doesn't state where they come from. It wants you to presume that rights are granted by the United Nations. If this presumption is accepted, then the United Nations that has given the right can claim power to take it away, which is exactly what it claims 2 sentences later where the covenant states, this: freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary. The UN attitude towards rights is totally opposite the American way. Under the UN system, no one has any rights except those granted by the UN, and all rights can be limited by law. And this document repeats the same process again and again. For instance, in Article 21, it states, "The right of peaceful assembly shall be recognized. No restrictions may be placed on the exercise of this right other than those imposed in conformity with the law." And so it goes. The UN refuses to acknowledge God as the giver of rights, presumes power to grant them, and also claims power to cancel them out of existence. But the American system says Congress shall make no law regarding God-given rights. Our nation is indeed being taken piece by piece into a world government under the United Nations. The UN covenant we have discussed is simply one of many treaties, covenants, pacts, and other documents that have either been ratified or soon will be, unless the American people stop this treachery. Each of these treaties is like a Lilliputian thread around Gulliver. No one thread, and not even a few, could tie Gulliver down, but when all the threads were in place, Gulliver was a prisoner and couldn't move. Let me tell you what's planned for America by referring to what has already happened in Australia. In 1985, a controversy developed over a proposal to build a hydroelectric power dam in the Australian state of Tasmania. After the site had been selected, opponents of the project sought to block it in the name of the environment and the need to refrain from spoiling the area's heritage. Ultimately, Australia's High Court, the equivalent of the Supreme Court in that nation, decided that Australia had ratified a United Nations convention dealing with World Heritage Sites, and because a portion of the area where the dam would be constructed had already been designated a UN heritage site, the dam could not be built. The laws of the state of Tasmania didn't apply, and neither did the laws of the nation of Australia. The United Nations was supreme. Australian friends tell us that their nation is party to hundreds of UN agreements, covenants, and treaties, and for all practical purposes, the UN already rules Australia. During the summer of 1992, homosexual activists in our nation were gleefully pointing to a tactic employed by a homosexual group, again in Tasmania, in Australia. The Australian homosexuals had petitioned the United Nations Human Rights Committee, established under provisions of the UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. They complained that Tasmania's law against sodomy violated their civil rights. Note that the group went to the United Nations to have the Tasmania law voided. Homosexuals in our nation would delight in following a similar course of action for America. In addition to the threat posed by the United Nations Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, there are many other UN-sponsored treaties and conventions being proposed for Senate ratification. There's the United Nations International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights that would also supersede our nation's Bill of Rights. There's the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child that places UN power between parents and children. There's the Law of the Sea Conference. There's a whole host of controls over mankind in the name of protecting the environment contained in the proposed United Nations treaty known as Agenda 21. My colleague, William Jasper, is the author of this very important book about the United Nations entitled Global Tyranny, Step by Step. He is one of very few Americans who has read Agenda 21 and all of the plans that it entails. He says that it is a frightening master plan for totalitarian control of the earth. This edited version of Agenda 21 was compiled by environmental activist attorney Daniel Sitars. In calling for its complete implementation, Mr. Sitars stated that it will require a profound reorientation of all human society unlike anything the world has ever experienced, a major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals. Ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty frightening. I can assure you that the promoters of the United Nations Agenda 21 have no intention of allowing the United States Constitution and our God-given rights as individuals to stand in their way. Let's summarize what we have discussed in this short program. 4 points. 1, the Founding Fathers explicitly condemned the notion that treaty law supersedes the Constitution. This is so even if John Foster Dulles and some senators and some Supreme Court justices and a host of New World Order advocates claim that it does. Number 2, it is a gross misreading of the Constitution, deliberate or otherwise, to hold that treaty law supersedes the Constitution and is supreme. 3, the United Nations Covenant on Civil and Political Rights amounts to a fundamental denial of the American system. Under it, no one has any rights except those allowed by the United Nations. Yet its ratification was accomplished for our nation by as few as 5 senators. And the 4th item in our summary is this. The purpose of tying our nation to a series of United Nations treaties is to have us become totally dominated by the United Nations in the manner that Australia is already finding herself. So what do we do about this? Well, we just summarized with 4 conclusions, and we have an equal number of recommendations. Our first recommendation: we must educate fellow citizens about the plans of those who would use treaty law to destroy national independence and bring us into the New World Order. William Jasper's book, Global Tyranny, Step by Step, is an excellent beginning. Our second recommendation: senators must be placed on notice by the people that no treaty should be ratified without a quorum defined as a majority, and no treaty can supersede the Constitution. Recommendation number 3, many treaties already ratified must be canceled. This document, Presidential Authority to Terminate Treaties, issued by the State Department as far back as 1979, shows that the President has the power to terminate treaties, as President Carter did when he canceled our Mutual Defense Treaty with the Republic of China on Taiwan. Also, if treaties must be ratified by the Senate, then the Senate can unratify them, even if the President will not. And our 4th recommendation, simply this: the United States must withdraw from the United Nations. As Senator Robert Taft stated over 40 years ago, the United Nations has become a trap. Let's go it alone. The United States of America is unique among all nations. Casting aside our heritage in favor of the godless United Nations means placing all Americans under the potential tyranny of the UN. Yet that is precisely what advocates of the New World Order seek. Don't let it happen, my friends. Let's continue as an independent nation. Let's hold on to and improve our nation, the greatest experiment in human liberty in all history. And let's continue to pledge allegiance to our flag and to one nation under God, not the United Nations. What does the John Birch Society intend to do about these things? Well, simply, the John Birch Society has always sought to create awareness about the marvelous system of government given us by our forefathers, and about forces within and without America working to change and destroy it. Never a political organization, the Society seeks to provide information believing that an informed public is the effective route to restoring and retaining good government. Our goals in the John Birch Society have been summarized in the motto: less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. We seek to accomplish these ends through education as our total strategy and truth as our only weapon. Americans owe it to themselves to examine our program with a view toward helping us to preserve the freedom that most of our fellow Americans take for granted. Contact us today. If you are among the tens of millions of Americans of good conscience and humane ideals, you will be glad you did. You may then likely decide, as so many Americans have already decided, to join us in our proud companionship and in our epic undertaking. We look forward to your inquiry, and we thank you very much for your attention during this program.